designers provide frames of orientation for planners, they imagine new alternative realities and provide them to planners to then develop courses of action or intervention strategies within these new frames. What are some examples that you've experienced of great handoffs between the designers and the teams who have to imagine the actions that will go in these new frames?
What do you mean, the handoff?
What are the transition? What are some examples? What characteristics of a good handoff are there?
You see, one of the, I'm pulling a bit back or higher just to give you, just to create better conditions for answering your question, because it's a good question. You see, for us, a designer is not just a guy who's supposed to, you see, we've spent a lot of time now talking about the principal challenges of a designer. I mean, mentally, cognitively, he very much frames a complex emergence by using systems logic. He very much creates the degrees of freedom that very much captures the strategic potential for transformation and change, and then he translates these pieces of logic into an operational configuration that at the end of the day is based very much on the existing doctrinal, organizational, operational capacities to act, to perform pieces of the operation. But the operation is a unique architecture. But this is not the end of his job, not even the beginning. You see, we have already touched that. First of all, the designer, in this respect, again, there's a great resemblance to architecture. Remember, you guys are very much into the business of design. Everybody is becoming a designer now. People teach design in terms of thinking, which means creating bullshit, nothing. The great thing, what really links design in terms of military and design, or operational design as we call it, and architectural design is very much linked to the fact that at the end of the day, you're not only conceptualizing the environment, the reality, the potential, you're also introducing change in the patterns of building, in the patterns of organization and action, and finally you create something new. You create something new. In the designer's aspect, it's a new building that has aesthetic function, but also, functional aspects. In the operational design perspective, you create an operation that very much changes the environment in compliance with your wishes, with your desires, with your understanding. Probably the compatibility between the final manifestation of the operation and the compatibility between that and the actual changes that will take place in the world will be not that great. In the architectural, from an architectural aspect, there would be some gaps, there would be some friction, there would be some changes, but the final manifestation, a formal manifestation, and the new environment, the compatibility would be bigger. Usually it's bigger because the hidden variables are less, there are less hidden variables in the architectural world than in the military world, in the world of operations. Now, what I'm implying here is that the designer, And in our case, when we say the word designer, we actually mean the operator with a big capital O. When we say operator, we actually mean the guy who actually framed the strategy. We do not expect the politicians, like in architecture, to give the designer a directive. If they could have done that, they would have not needed the guy in command. They would have given orders to the tactical commanders. They need the designer to actually frame the strategy, frame the world, frame the strategy, frame the operation. And they're all one unity. You see, so the guy has to be the guy that frames the environment, the reality, the emergence, frame the strategy, so he has to be, the designer has to very much design the avenues of communication to convince or learn or discourse or dialogue with the sponsor. In other words, he must be, I don't use, now I'm going to refrain from using the word manipulator because Americans hate this word. This word. I mean, you have a problem of really dealing with it. In our case, but the designer, first of all, has to be a master, and in this respect, Yigal Allon was a failure. He totally failed to really capture the mind of his boss. He never managed to convince Ben-Gurion. And the designer must be a kind of psychological communicator, a guy who can really map. In this, we had such, in fact, we did, the former CENTCOM, a guy called Ronnie Numa was a master of communications. He actually, when he approached us, Palestinians are the easiest piece. It's very easy to conceptualize the Palestinians. It's very easy. My real challenges are to conceptualize my bosses. And when he says bosses, he means the Chief of General Staff. There are several bosses. He has several bosses. Minister of Defense, Prime Minister. And they are not a unity, unlike your system. The President is the commander-in-chief. In Israel, there are several commanders-in-chief, and he has to actually not only get to the mind of each one of them by using psychological communication, but also to make them a system and play with them. Not for his own favor, for the favor of the nation, of the state. But they have different considerations. The Prime Minister has political considerations and different cultural perspective. The Minister of Defense was a total different. At this time was Lieberman, was a real raw guy. Tough guy, smart, cunning, but clueless. Clueless. Very. Has this facade of a brutal guy. Actually, it's very easy to. And I remember when Ronnie got to his job, initially, as CENTCOM, he was kind of concerned, scared. I'm going to deal. Because the previous Minister of Defense was Bogi Ya'alon, was Chief of General Staff. Was easy. They could talk about cogs and lines of operation. Lieberman, and he was afraid. And I remember we were having these discussions and we told him, the way you operate, you will map him cognitively, you will hold him by the balls, or by the brain. No problem. And after a short while, Lieberman became, I won't say his best friend, but he felt totally confident of his capacity to deal with him. What I'm trying to tell you is that a designer in our business is also a master communicator. He must be capable of communicating. Moreover, he must be a master teacher. A master teacher. Or let's say, you see, he can perform when you have to teach your boss. You cannot perform the role of teacher. You have to be a very kind of, I would say, kind of reluctant teacher. Or a kind of, you see, because no boss is going to accept, no president or no commander-in-chief can accept the fact that somebody is going to teach him. You actually have to bring him into a certain condition by really establishing them, and then create a dynamic of learning in which he actually has the impression that he's teaching you, but actually you're teaching him, and he's not aware of that. So the designer must be a very, very sophisticated mode of teacher. Moreover, if he wants his subordinates not just to listen to what he say and then obey, but to really fully grasp, fully understand, fully appreciate his ideas, he must very much use them or bring them or make them part of his learning. Otherwise, it's giving orders and executing orders. That's a different level of it's a way of performing, it's not a way of understanding. So the designer is must be a master communicator, a master teacher, because to really lay out the epistemological conditions for dealing with your boss and dealing with your subordinate or your peers, it's a big issue. What I'm trying to tell you here is that there are a lot of soft elements. You see, design is not a technique like planning. Planning is the technique of learning. Very effective, very simple to perform. I mean, but a lot of limitations. You cannot go beyond, you cannot destroy or deconstruct doctrine because the whole raison d'etre of planning is that it is based on doctrine. It is dependent on doctrine. The whole idea of design is, you see, the designer looks at the doctrine, looks at the doctrinal manifestation, organization, ethos, etc., looks at reality and is trying to observe the differences, the gaps. And then he say, well, I can overcome if I do that. I can overcome this gap if I do that. But then he comes to a level that he say, well, there is a limit how much I can really adapt the doctrine. And then he say, okay, I change doctrine right now. This is why, in our case, it's easy. The general says, doctrine.